All right, we'll get started. We try to start on time. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. And as you may know, the topic today is about our newly published discussion paper on extended producer responsibility and plastic credits. And today we are four people on the panel. Just give a brief introduction. We are very happy to have Rocky Guzman joining us from Asian Development Bank. He will be delivering a keynote. I will give a more in-depth introduction in a minute. And we have Komal Sinha. She's a Senior Director for Government and Policy Engagements here at Verra. My name is Vigil. I'm a Senior Program Officer for Plastic Policy and Markets. And then we also have Kristen Linscott. She's a manager and she works on the plastic program for about 3.5 years. She will be monitoring the Q&A for today. And just some quick housekeeping. You'll have opportunities to ask questions through the Q&A function, and Kristen will answer some questions live, and we can also answer some questions on the panel. And as for resources, a recording of this webinar and the whole slide deck, as well as a full report, will be shared with you following the webinar. And if you have additional questions or comments that you want to send directly to us, you are welcome to reach out to us through plasticstandard.verra@verra.org. This is the agenda we want to cover today. We'll hear a keynote from Rocky, and then Como will give a brief introduction of Verra's plastic program in case you're new to our program. And then I will cover some key findings from this paper, including the EPR landscape and 3 phases of EPR implementation, 6 country case studies that we analyzed in this report, and also identified EPR implementation challenges associated with different implementation phases. And then we'll have a short Q&A, and after that, I will take you through the benefits of integrating plastic credits into EPR systems. And then we'll governance, legal, and policy specialist at Asian Development Bank. He's an environmental lawyer and a policy specialist with extensive experience in ocean issues. He has worked in various nonprofits and international organizations, and he's led projects on marine conservation, plastic pollution, fishery management, and strengthening the environmental rights. He obtained his Master of Environmental Policy from Duke University and is the Deputy Director of the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law. He will share some key trends and considerations ahead of INC 5.2. He will also highlight the importance of innovative finance, particularly for the emerging markets. The floor is yours, Rocky. I'll stop sharing.
Great. Thank you very much, Visual, for that kind introduction, and thank you to Vera and all the organizers for the opportunity to open this very important discussion. And the timing could not have been better as we approach the tail end of the global plastics treaty negotiations happening next week, and as people are flying into Geneva this coming days for the supposed last round of negotiations, there is even more urgency to move towards adoption and prepare for its implementation to end plastic pollution. Now, we might have heard that the financing gap to address plastic pollution is huge, and it requires a mix of interventions, including significant investments in waste management and infrastructure, as well as regulatory reform, especially in developing country contexts. Now, this session's focus on innovative finance is therefore both timely and essential. And the upcoming negotiation round should focus on mechanisms for implementation. And finance, being core in all these, would be the enabler for building the systems that are needed to transition to circularity. Now we're ahead now of INC 5.2, but we can look at the last session, a recap, which showed both progress and some persistent points of divergence. There has been progress on issues such as downstream waste management and just transition, but despite the productive talks, there were also ongoing divisions among states on critical matters, showing differences in countries' ambitions and priorities. These matters include things like upstream controls, plastic production, and chemicals of concern. Now, a critical debate also centers on whether the plastics treaty should have binding global rules or voluntary, nationally determined measures. But in any case, the key takeaway here is that whatever the treaty's final scope is, implementation will require resources, especially for the means of implementation, which includes capacity building, infrastructure, technology transfer, and policy development. And this financing that we need should address the gap across the whole value chain. This includes upstream production to downstream waste, especially in low and middle income countries. And this should also ensure a just transition that reflects local context and capabilities. Now, I'd like to go on the importance of innovative finance. And this discussion is important against the backdrop of building the financing program for the Plastics Treaty, which is vital for supporting the activities for implementation, as well as the infrastructure for the transition to a circular economy. To ensure the treaty's success, financing strategies must be sufficient, predictable, accessible, and sustainable. This requires additional mobilization and redirection of finance towards emerging economies where the needs are greatest, and integrating as well private sector participation. Now, given the scale of the problem, traditional finance models are often insufficient, and innovative financing, which we'll discuss here, are essential to mobilize the capital needed, both from public and private sources. Innovative financing models such as blue and green bonds, plastic pollution fees and levies, extended producer responsibility, EPR, and plastic credits that could be linked could generate a sustainable revenue stream for the treaty's implementation. Among others, these mechanisms can de-risk investment in the circular economy and link finance to measurable outcomes that address plastic pollution. For the past years, the Asian Development Bank has been extending technical assistance to Southeast Asian countries towards circularity, including through policy reform, national and local level planning, and support for green and blue finance mechanisms, leading to investment that seek to reduce plastic pollution. ADB has been providing facilities such as the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, the Nature Solutions Finance Hub, and guidance such as the Oceans Finance Framework for Blue Economy Investments. But with the recent developments with the Global Plastics Treaty, ADB has also been supporting the preparation for alignment of developing member countries with the mandates of the Plastics Treaty. Now, these opportunities for ADB support include providing support for enabling frameworks through national plans, legislation, and financing frameworks, including EPR, the treaty implementation through investments in infrastructure, as well as capacity building and innovative solutions for waste management. Now, in particular, for governance frameworks or enabling conditions, opportunities for countries in Asia and the Pacific include the development of EPR systems or the full implementation of EPR systems for others, and an enabling framework for innovative finance mechanisms, including plastic credits. ADB has been doing this through the policy-based lending modality, with Indonesia as an example, where ADB has been supporting a holistic, system-wide approach to operationalize a circular plastic economy and support policy reforms, including EPR. A similar approach is being developed in the Philippines to fully implement the EPR system. Now, these interventions are complemented by blue loans that seek to expand recycling and promote reusable packaging and refilling, among others. And with all this package of support, ADB is supporting a holistic approach for government and private sector investments to enable a circular economy for plastics. Now, as we go to the discussion, the potential policy reform areas in this region can look at the link of EPR with plastic credits as a possible complementary financial instrument that enables an inclusive and high-functioning system. It's worth highlighting that the previous drafts and intersessional documents of the Plastics Treaty, and you can look it up, they explicitly recognize plastic credits and EPR as innovative finance mechanisms. And in particular, credits can offer a robust monitoring framework with third-party audits and social and environmental safeguards and transparency measures in place. Plastic credit projects can therefore complement and integrate with EPR systems and create steady revenue flows towards circularity, which is needed in many emerging markets. Now, in closing, as we go through this very exciting discussion of the paper, I'd like to highlight that the Plastics Treaty will do more than set legal obligations for states. It will actually provide the framework to enable implementation at scale, particularly where needs are greatest. Now, finance, and particularly innovative financing, will be the cornerstone of success, and mechanisms like EPR and plastic credits can bridge ambition and action that is needed. Now, through all this, ADB stands ready to support countries with policy, investment, and innovation to meet their commitments for the Plastics Treaty. And this can be through EPR and innovative financing in line with the mandates of the Global Plastics Treaty. Now, at this point, I'd like to give a huge congratulations to Verra and the team on the launch of this discussion paper. I'm looking forward to hearing more about it. This definitely would contribute to the much needed solutions that align with the treaty's goals and which will accelerate the transition to a circular plastics economy in Asia and the Pacific and beyond. So I end there. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And at this point, I'd like to hand it over to Komal Sinha from Verra to proceed with the discussion paper. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rocky. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your rich insights in relation to why we need the innovative finance to implement the core obligations of the treaty. And I cannot overstate enough how important it is that we get finance from all sources, public, private, and innovative finance in order to deliver on these ambitious treaty goals. As you rightly mentioned, Rocky, EPR is, of course, a very important policy instrument in order to address plastic pollution. But through our years of conversations and experience, and of course, through the development of this paper, we also realized that EPR comes with its own set of challenges and implementation, particularly across the developing economies. And therefore, for it to be able to achieve its full potential, it must be a part of or operate in tandem with other policies and innovative financial instruments. And that's where plastic credits come in. And that is the core of our discussion today, as well as the paper that Verra has just released on this topic. Before we dive into the details of this paper, I want to take a couple of minutes to take you through our organization, Verra. I'm sure many of you are already familiar, but just very quickly about Verra, as well as Verra's plastic program, both of which have been instrumental in mobilizing innovative finance across the developing and emerging economies. So Verra, as most of you know, we are a mission-driven not-for-profit. We develop and manage a range of standards that benefit the government, the private sector, and the civil society, helping them meet their ambitious climate and development goals. The standards way that we operate, you can see them on the screen. But today, as you have guessed, the focus of our discussion is going to be on Verra's plastic waste reduction standard. Moving on. About Verra's plastic program. So what really is the program? For the sake of simplicity, maybe I can say that it has two core components or modules. So the plastic waste reduction standard and plastic credits. Plastic standard, along with its two supporting methodologies, provides a uniform framework for measuring and monitoring the impacts of plastic waste collection and recycling activities, and also has inbuilt mandatory social and environmental safeguards. These two technical methodologies allow you to quantify the impact of your collection and recycling activities, respectively. And then plastic credit is an instrument that is issued for those project activities that are certified with Verra's plastic standard following its robust requirements and third-party audits. And how is plastic credit really measured? It is equivalent to 1 additional ton of plastic waste that is either collected from nature and or recycled. And there are two types of credits that can be issued in the program, depending upon the end outcome of plastic waste and recognizing that finance is needed for both of these activities, so waste collection as well as waste recycling, leading to issuance of waste collection credits and waste recycling credits, respectively. Next slide, please. So this is sort of an illustration of the entire plastic credit ecosystem. And what does Verra, where does Verra fit in? What is our role? So as you can see from at the top, Verra is the standard setter. So we develop the standard for collection and recycling activities. Projects can certify with Verra's plastic program following its robust requirements. in order to issue plastic credits. Compliance with plastic program requirements is assessed by third-party auditors, also known as validation and verification bodies. Verra reviews these documents in order to make sure that they're in compliance with the requirements of the program, and then issues plastic credits transparently displayed on Verra registry. Then businesses can purchase plastic credits to make credible investments into plastic waste management, and this investment flows back into the project, allowing these project activities to scale the impact of their plastic waste collection and recycling activities. Moving on. So, as most of you know, the program was launched in 2021 and it has steadily grown since then. As you can see, we have more than 60 projects listed. That means they're at various stages of implementation and requesting certification with the program. A total of 32 projects have been registered so far. As you can see, projects are pretty much spread across the world, but you will also notice that most of these projects are sort of concentrated across the global south, kind of validating the understanding that it is this region that needs the finance the most. And this is where projects will be able to utilize plastic credit revenue most urgently to be able to solve plastic waste management challenges. On the next slide, well, the first thing that you'll notice is a lot of zeros, and that is an indicator of the extent of funding that is needed in order to make the world circular between now and 2040. It is greater than $5 trillion. And where is that money going to come from? Of course, we need public sector finance. It is essential. But at the same time, as most of us know, the government budgets, particularly in developing countries, has a lot of competing priorities. There's health and safety, there's water and sanitation, there's energy, there's food, and then there's circular economy. And therefore, it is evident that the government budget cannot support it. And it's also not fair for the government budget to be able to kind of carry this burden all by themselves. And that's why private sector comes in order to complement, to be able to scale the impact of these kind of operations. But at the same time, the sector continues to be chronically underfunded because the economics of waste management do not incentivize recycling. And that's the reason why we have been seeing the emergence of a new and innovative source of finance, rightly labeled as innovative finance. On the screen, you can see various different examples of the type of innovative finance that are available. And Rocky also alluded to the fact that they have been referenced many times during the INC discussions and the various resources that have been published during the INC discourse. The ones highlighted, plastic credits, plastic bond, and extended producer responsibility would be the focus of our webinar during the next 30-40 minutes or so. And my colleague Vijil will introduce these to you and also share how these interact with each other and what is the interoperability between these three innovative mechanisms. So without any more delay, I'm going to hand the floor over to Vijil to take you through the key outcomes and summary of our discussion paper. So over to you, Vijil.
Thank you so much, Komo and Rocky, for setting the scene. So from here, I'll take you through a deep dive of the key findings of the discussion paper. So please allow me to briefly to cover the EPR landscape, as international policymakers are currently exploring implementing of EPR in all markets, because it is seen as a necessary means to provide dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient funding for sustainable waste management. And EPR essentially holds producers responsible for the environmental impact of their products and aim to really shift the cost and responsibility of waste management from local governments to producers. And there are currently nearly 400 EPRs globally, but they're covering a range of different products and material types. And around nearly 70 EPRs exist, and that's solely focused on plastic packaging. And these are policy-backed and mandatory and fee-based. As you can see, this is an illustration from a World Bank publication. You can see the distribution of EPR. They are still mainly in the global north. And there are already some examples of countries utilizing the crediting mechanism within their EPR system. The World Bank also provided a framework for assessing common challenges and opportunities across 3 different phases of EPR implementation. And for the paper, we also built on top of this framework. So we also looked into 3 different phases of EPR implementation. Phase 1 is the initiation phase, that is the exploration of EPR. The key objective is to put EPR on the political agenda. A couple of key tasks that countries need to go through during this phase are, for example, initial discussions with key stakeholders to build a common vision and also start setting goals and targets for the scope of the EPR and to have, for example, recycling rates or collection rates for the waste. And there is also a need for initial assessment of the waste management sector's capacity and the gaps that's existing in the current practice and the potential interventions that's needed. It's quite common for this phase of EPR to be led by voluntary industry-led initiatives, and they are also the one really leading the dialogue and setting best practice criteria. And for phase 2 is a transitional phase, so that's mainly for countries that are moving from voluntary to mandatory EPR. The key focus for this phase is to establish a legally binding and enforceable regulatory framework. The government needs to establish a mechanism for EPR implementation, and also a key task is to design equitable and efficient delegation of responsibilities to finance and improve operational performance of the waste management sector. There's also a great need to really upscale and expand the infrastructure for waste management to be able to realize the goals of EPR. Third phase is the maturity phase, where EPR is supposedly already effective and relatively efficient. However, EPR systems are quite dynamic and as is a very dynamic market, and there are constantly new waste streams coming into the market and also new technologies. So a key task of this phase is to continually improve and monitor, evaluate the current system, and to constantly improve performance and to really even enhance efficiency and accountability. And also to adapt to the technological evolutions and really to drive innovation that involves all system actors. And this is we did initial exploration of this topic and looking at the intersection between EPR and plastic credit last year, and where we published a very brief paper on this topic where we highlighted some common challenges that Como already alluded to, and also we highlighted some general opportunities where plastic credit can be a complementary financing mechanism to support EPR implementation. A key finding of this briefing paper are the four very prominent challenges that emerging markets and developing economies would face. First of all is underdeveloped waste sector. And this goes beyond infrastructure, as it's also about having the key stakeholders along the value chain to be engaged into the EPR conversation. And second of all, instituting the legal, regulatory, and administrative requirements to implement EPR is very resource intensive for governments, which is also a common constraint for emerging markets and developing economies. And such capacity building interventions are usually quite complex, resource intensive, and also rely on very limited and inconsistent development aid. The third is on the funding deficit for infrastructure that you might have already known, but even further to worsen this issue for emerging markets, the cost for managing waste occupies about 19% of the municipal budget in emerging markets as compared to only 4% in high-income countries. Meanwhile, most of the circularity investment are still going into the global north. Last but not least is the inclusivity of the informal sector, who are the key driver of plastic waste collection of the current system and also the global recycling market. However, they are it's usually the marginalized group who are doing this work, and they are not being appropriately included in the conversation or well compensated. So building on this finding, we just finalized a more comprehensive discussion paper that we're publishing today, which identified further key challenges for countries that are across different phases of EPR implementation. And this includes the emerging markets and also developed economies. We explored potential benefits that plastic credit can provide into various EPR implementation phases and through 6 country case studies, 2 country case studies for each phase that we will discuss. We also highlighted some opportunities to leverage plastic credit to benefit the EPR system, and we also provide some tailored recommendation for key stakeholder groups that are involved in EPR development. So here are the 6 country case studies that's analyzed in the paper, and I just want to, and you can see they really they have a good geographical spread, and we really aim to cover different political, social, and economic context. The goal of having these case studies is to really contextualize EPR implementation archetypes. We don't mean to assess national performance or rank country for their EPR development. This is really just to this really represent a snapshot in time, and this, of course, may evolve as policy and markets are evolving very rapidly in this landscape. So for phase 1, we have Ghana and Indonesia. So for phase 2 implementation, we have Kenya and Vietnam as example. And then for phase 3, we have the Netherlands and Chile. And slightly a bit of a deep dive into the 2 country case studies for phase 1. So first one, we looked into Indonesia, which already had a policy or a roadmap to EPR in place since 2019. It already required producers to reduce the waste that's generated from their products by 30% by 2029. And this policy mainly targets large national and multinational companies. And this year, there's a new government in place, and the Ministry of Environment announced plan to revise the regulation and really work towards mandatory EPR. And that's the future plan. However, currently, there are some challenges in their implementation of the voluntary EPR, as there is no formal enforceable mechanism for collecting or distributing fees to really finance this EPR mechanism. As there are no fees charged by the system, and there is no collection fee collections through the system, and there is no penalty for non-compliance. And the current waste management infrastructure is still lacking, especially in the rural area. As you may know, Indonesia has many, many islands, and these also pose a great challenge for collecting waste. And also at the moment, there's no clear administrative structure for oversight of their current EPR system. Another example we looked at is Ghana, halfway across the world, and they have also been exploring EPR as early as 2018. And there is a voluntary PRO, producer responsibility organization, in place. It's called Ghana Recycling Initiative by private enterprises. And they face some common challenges as Indonesia, as only 9.5% of plastic waste are collected for recycling, and there's very limited infrastructure and high rates of littering, open burning, and dumping. There's extremely limited finance for waste management, as the fee charged for waste service is very low, and there's very high cost of utility that's associated with waste management. And so the sector has very low profitability at the moment. There's also lack of visibility of the informal sector and extremely complex and overlapping governance structure for their EPR implementation. A couple key challenges we summarize for phase 1 is a lack of reliable data and an administrative structure that's needed to measure or track progress, underdeveloped infrastructure, and the lack of clear finance mandates or mechanism. For phase 2, we looked into Vietnam and Kenya. This is for countries that are going through the transition or have a newly implemented mandatory EPR. In the case of Vietnam, since 2024, from last year, producers of regulated products, which includes plastic packaging, have been required to comply with mandatory recycling obligations. Producers have various options to demonstrate compliance. They can either contribute financially, or they can also organize or collaborate with others to organize waste management. And some challenges are, for example, stakeholders have called for greater transparency on the spending of the collected EPR financial contribution, which is called Vietnam Environmental Protection Fund. And also, currently, the recycling operation relies too heavily on imported waste, and the technologies are quite outdated in the sector and really need some upgrade. And the informal sector, they are performing 90% of the recovery activity without proper compensation. and there is a lack of guidance and clarity from the government structure and compliance monitoring. However, the government also reinforce their commitment to really implement mandatory EPR. So we're looking forward to see more updates on the policy in the very near future. And then for Kenya, they have the National Environment Management Authority monitors PROs. They have had mandatory EPR for all packaging in their policy since 2022. And the PROs have the full financial and organizational responsibility for implementing EPR. However, a couple challenges are, for example, the government enforcement agency doesn't have sufficient resource to really effectively discharge their legal mandates. And the fee that's been collected is very low at about $4 per ton, which is insufficient to cover the full cost of waste management. And also in the rural, even parts of urban area of Kenya, there's a lack of waste management services. And also another aspect is there are two main PROs in Kenya that's leading to some competition and also lead to increased capacity demand for the government to effectively harmonize reporting and monitor the progress. And the very recent development this May, the High Court in Nairobi actually issued a temporary conservatory order to halt the implementation of EPR in Kenya, which really underscores the complex and often nonlinear nature of EPR implementation in the emerging markets. But nevertheless, the policy framework and scenario that's been analyzed in this section still remains relevant for countries in similar situations. So to summarize, a few common challenges for countries in phase 2 are the fragmentation in the legal and operational framework, still significant funding gap due to the lack of compliance, even when the policy is mandatory. And also there's a shortcoming still in the existing waste management infrastructure, as well as the lack of inclusion of the informal sector. For phase 3, a more mature EPR, we looked into Chile, which has the EPR policy was published in 2019 and approved in 2020 and officially went into force. The obligations became enforceable in 2023. A few challenges in this case are most of the funding that's collected through the National Waste Program are going to support sanitary landfill, and it's not clear how much of the funding collected are going into recycling infrastructures. And Chile has a collection rate of nearly 100%, however, only 8.5% of the waste is recycled. And similarly to Kenya, multiple PROs exist, which leads to competition and potential complexity for tracking progress in a consistent manner. And last but not least, we looked into the Netherlands, which is really one of the leading examples of EPR implementation. They have a single PRO system. The fee is set by the government through Verra, which is the PRO in the Netherlands. And the fees are very detailed depending on the material type, ranging from very, very little for paper and cardboard to more than 1,000 euros per kilogram for flexible, multiple material and single-use plastics, as they are hard to recycle. As the system is already quite advanced, however, there are still challenges or areas of improvement. For example, the recycling of hard to recycle, flexible, multi-material, and durable products still falls short and still needs more innovation, because only a fraction of the plastic waste collected is suitable for mechanical recycling. There is also it's a very expensive system, and the policy is quite complicated, and the rising target also requires increasing granularity of performance reporting. Innovation is still needed to really achieve more circularity goals. Some common challenges for countries that are potentially in phase 3 are still there might be non-compliance existing, and also lack of harmonization of measurement and reporting, especially when there are multiple PROs in place or there's many different regions involved within a country. And there is also room for improvement to increase the recycling rate and even further include more material types. Here's a summary of the challenges that we just covered. I won't repeat, you will have the slides. And we can take a very short Q&A break here if there's any questions from the audience.
Yeah, I can come in here to help. We haven't had a ton of questions thus far, so this does give us a good opportunity to remind you to use the Q&A feature for any questions that do come up amongst the remainder of the presentation. But I think one thing I will ask from one of the questions, you touched on it a bit before, but could you just remind everyone like how we chose to classify or select these specific countries that you just walked through?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So beyond the framework that's provided by the World Bank study that looks into some common characteristics of the activities that's taking place within each country, and also data and information availability is also another factor in our selection. And as you can see, the countries that are selected have covers very different social, political, and economic contexts. So we want to make sure that the countries we are selecting are diverse, and so we're not missing any key characteristics when we're trying to extract some typical archetypes on the base of these country case studies. And I just want to re-emphasize that these are not meant to assess national performance or judge the country's performance in any way. We really just want to have these very concrete and real national scenarios to further illustrate what are the concrete examples of countries in these phases and what are the common challenges and opportunities. Yeah, well, thanks. For the sake of time, we'll just quickly move on. I'll cover the next section, and then we'll still have 5 minutes of Q&A towards the end. So we're going into, so what are the specific benefits of integrating plastic credits into EPR systems? Como has covered this. There are various elements of the Verra's plastic program, and here I just want to present it from a slightly different perspective and break down our program into 5 essential elements that are relevant for EPR. So you already know the plastic program is underpinned by a globally applicable framework that allows for consistent monitoring and measurement of activities in different local or regional contexts. So we already have a global applicable framework. And then there's also independent third-party audit. And this is mandated by the program, and just to make sure that projects that are implemented can verify their outcome, and also to ensure that they are operating in line with our various requirements. And we have a public registry system, which is very transparent and openly accessible to the public. This makes sure that we have a transparent process, and all the plastic credits are listed on this public platform, and they each have a unique serial number that includes information on the material type or activity type and destination where it's relevant. And we also have a stakeholder engagement and environmental and social safeguards. This is also an important element, as you've heard, challenges often is involvement of the informal sector. This makes sure that projects will address any potential health risk and really to facilitate additional social benefits. In the stakeholder engagement requirements could also support the inclusion of the informal sector, as projects are mandated to identify potentially impacted stakeholders, and they need to be involved throughout the design and implementation of the projects under our program. And last but not least, a plastic credit is a funding instrument. And I just want to emphasize these are the core elements of our program. They are globally applicable, and they can adapt to different regional or country scenarios. And as our program is it's self-funded, if a government chooses to leverage our program as it is, it doesn't require additional funding or the government's own capacity to institute these frameworks and for example, the infrastructure of the registry. And here I'm just mapping the common elements for EPR systems and these elements I just mentioned from our program, just to emphasize that they actually share a common objective, is to drive finance to high quality projects and really to help support the waste management sector. I will now go through some of the key benefits we have identified of integrating plastic credit into EPR. So a very important one is to enable finance, as plastic credit can align financial flows from a range of sources towards high quality collection and recycling projects, therefore de-risking investments into waste management. And then on the operational aspect, the program plastic credit can increase infrastructure capacity and provide best practice approach for operational due diligence and impact measurement. And last but not least is the administration aspect. This is most helpful for the governments, as the program provides a framework for transparent auditing, monitoring, and reporting on regulatory compliance and waste management outcomes, and including the safeguards for environment and social protection, which is also often what's needed on the ground. And this is a further breakdown of the benefits under the three big categories. For example, in enabling finance, there's aspects of the program can help increase access for high quality projects, visibility, and to help facilitate connection to the potential investors. And there's also a security aspect, because the program help de-risk investments as the projects are all verified and are high quality. And then the program can also mobilize new funding sources by even beyond the limit of the scope of EPR. On the operational side, the program can improve coverage, which means scale the capacity or upscale the infrastructure that's essential to fulfill EPR obligations, and even expand activities to new areas or materials. And on the standard aspect, the program provides uniform monitoring, reporting, and verification framework for operational due diligence. It also drives measurable outcomes and prioritized results. On the administration aspect, the infrastructure of the program and the framework already is very helpful for tracking progress and the producer's financial contribution, as all the information will be publicly available. And the program also would help support demonstrate best practice, because there is environmental and social protection safeguards in place. And then also the transparency aspect, as I have mentioned. And now what it actually looks like when we are talking about sort of specific phases, and there are actually slightly differences in how plastic credit can bring benefits to countries at different phases of EPR implementation. For example, for phase 1, where we looked at Ghana and Indonesia, the best opportunity for plastic credit is to help local stakeholders to demonstrate best practice, as organizations that are able to generate plastic credit can serve as an example that are operating in line with environmental and social safeguards, and also incorporating robust monitoring, reporting, and verification procedures. They can also demonstrate impacts with a third-party audit, and to make sure that the outcome is verified. And in this phase, we identified that it's usually the private sector that's really driving the national dialogue. They are co-creating a robust and effective governance system that could help support innovation and market-based solutions. The producers at this phase can leverage producers or voluntary PROs. They can directly leverage plastic credits and make credible investments into high-quality projects, and already set a high standard for best practice and prepare for the forthcoming EPR regulation when it becomes mandatory. We have a concrete example from Indonesia. It's called the Bottom Ocean Impact Project. It is the project proponents is 7 Clean Seas. They are working alongside existing local initiatives and informal waste workers and they designed, mobilized, and implemented cleanup and waste management projects on the ground. They hired and trained local community members to really collect and manage waste in the Batam area, which is quite remote in the north of Indonesia. And here another example, that's where the plastic bond, as mentioned earlier, comes into play. We have these two projects also in our system. One is in Indonesia and one is in Ghana, exactly the two countries that are selected for phase 1. These two projects are both really supporting the local community, and they are doing both plastic collection and recycling. These two projects are special because they are part of the outcome-based bond that was announced by the World Bank and Citibank last year. It's a good example of innovative finance, especially in the form of plastic bond. In total, the bond is worth $100 million and it has a 7-year maturity time period. And these two projects are the recipient of the funding from this bond, and they are actually already generating plastic credit. And the return to investors will be linked to these plastic credit that these projects are generating. And it is really the credibility of Verra's plastic program and the robustness of these requirements provides confidence to investors to make this bond happen. And then back to phase 2, where we look into Kenya and Vietnam in the transitional phase. At this phase, the key opportunity that can be leveraged through using plastic credit is to bolster performance, as plastic credit can be leveraged to ensure financial contributions are result-based. As they provide a proven compliance framework and ready infrastructure to streamline the reporting, also for the obligated entities under EPR scheme. Local stakeholders can also leverage the existing framework, which can reduce the regulatory burden of developing for the governments so they don't have to develop everything from scratch. And at this stage, governments are really leading the development of EPR on the ground, and they are the ones that can benefit the most from integrating plastic credit, as they have the option to formally recognize plastic credit as a way for obligated entities to demonstrate compliance, as there's already the framework, monitoring and verification framework in place, and as well as the infrastructure to transparently list all the projects and can also track financial contributions from the obligated entities. There's also the aspect of the program, also the social and environmental safeguard aspects can also improve the quality of the projects. An example we have for this phase is from Kenya, is the Takataka Solutions. They are collecting various plastic waste types from various channels like buyback centers, material recycling, material recovery facilities, and industrial partnerships. And then a lot of the plastic can be recycled and made into recycled plastic pellets and replacing virgin plastic in the local manufacturing. And this project actually features the first recycling plant for flexible waste, polymer, and single-use plastics in Kenya. In the third phase, the key benefits that plastic credit can bring is to drive innovation, as plastic credit offer this unique opportunity to support innovation because the program has a very broad scope of activities. Various activities can be under the scope of the program, and they can be leveraged to really by system actors to target new materials and also to develop waste infrastructure for underserved areas. The existing elements of the program can also enhance traceability and granularity in reporting. And waste management operators are the most likely to benefit from leveraging plastic credit, as they can potentially mobilize finance to support them in acquiring new equipment or facilities and to drive innovation. An example we have for this phase is a project from the Netherlands by Braskem. And they have an innovative technology that's really tackling the difficult to recycle plastics. These plastics, even in the Netherlands, are typically incinerated or going into landfill. But these projects are able to turn them into durable products that can be used in the construction and agriculture industries. And this is a classic example of going beyond the current scope of EPR in the Netherlands. And this is a summary of the key system benefits that I just ran through. And you may wonder, it's great to hear about the benefits, but how exactly can it be done? And so we didn't go into too much details in the report, as we didn't want to be prescriptive, as we fully recognize every country is different. They have different governance structure, different frameworks, and very different stakeholder dynamics. So we didn't want to put out a one-for-all solution of implementation pathways. But here I just want to highlight a few potential pathways that can be possible. But these will have to be confirmed through more in-depth consultation with the government, the policymakers themselves. So one potential pathway is to directly integrate plastic credit into existing or emerging EPR policy, which means obligated entities can directly already purchase high-quality plastic credit to fulfill their obligations. One possibility is the program can be already used as it is, and these existing and future projects can already demonstrate compliance, can be used to demonstrate compliance to EPR. There's also the possibility that we've heard feedback that some of our program requirements are simply too high or too difficult or simply not feasible to some local context. And however, this would still require advisement from the governments. And then it is possible we can work more closely with local policymakers and to determine whether necessary changes are needed to improve the adaptability of the program. Another possibility is indirect support. Our program can indirectly support existing or new EPR system to improve its efficiency. The plastic standard or the registry system and our expertise can also be leveraged. We can provide technical support and capacity building for governments that are in need of these expertise. And here is, we're coming towards the end, and here I just want to highlight a couple engagement options. First of all, here, the first QR code is our full report. You can already access that. We'll also send it to you as a follow-up, and you can learn more about the findings in the paper and also learn more about the plastic program. And for engagement opportunities, we organize bespoke technical and capacity building workshops. And this is an example. You can see a workshop we organized in Jakarta to really provide capacity building to the local stakeholders. And third, there are various funding partnership options at Verra. So, for example, we could collaboratively look for funding to develop a country-specific initiative to develop an effective EPR system with the support of Verra technical expertise. And you can also directly support Verra's work through the QR code. And just a reminder, we are a nonprofit organization, so any funding or donations will go straight to support our program and our mission. So with that, we are coming towards the end. I think we still have 5 minutes to answer a few questions. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yep. Just been looking at the questions that have come in thus far. If you have any others, feel free to submit. Maybe I'll start with this one. Somebody just wanted some clarity on how plastic credit prices are determined and wanting to understand if they're set in a systematic way and how much information on pricing is available to broader stakeholders or the public.
Yeah, that's a good question. We are, as Verra, we are independent standard setters, so we're not involved in the pricing of plastic credits. That's solely a market that's really dependent on the market. That's a conversation between project developers and credit buyers.
And yeah, as far as the pricing available to the broader market. I think there are some public resources available online for that, but Verra doesn't maintain it in our registry just due to our position as a standard setter. There's another question here that's somewhat maybe related. With different mechanisms, whether it be EPR or plastic credits, sometimes people know they can fall victim to like a race to the bottom situation. How can we ensure that plastic credits don't, fall into this category as well?
Yeah, I think we do hear this question quite a lot. And also just to emphasize that it's quite a common challenge for any compliance mechanism, as there will be a natural tendency to go for the low-cost solutions. And some of the country case studies I've mentioned, there is a preference for landfill or incineration over recycling. And also partly due to this reason. And to mitigate this risk, we think the government can potentially establish a minimum price in the case of plastic credit, just to make sure this doesn't happen and to make sure that there is sufficient funding going into high quality projects and are potentially covering the full cost of waste management. And the same can be said for EPR systems. There should also be a minimum or standard fee for to cover the services in the EPR system.
Great, thank you. The Q&A is pretty quiet otherwise, so I think that might round us out for questions today, but it puts us right about at time, so I will hand it back to you to just close us out.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kristen, and to Como and Rocky, and to everyone who's participating. And we will please get in touch if you have any further questions or have ideas for collaborations through plastic standards at verra.org. That's the inbox for the plastic program. And we really look forward to hearing from you. And if you're going to Geneva for INC 5.2, best of luck and safe travels. Thank you, everyone. I'll close this now.